Hello and welcome to VAL, Voices of Wisdom, the show that might not be for everybody, but everybody needs to watch this show. VAL is generally about relationships, and I talk about topics that are informative, educational, and sometimes controversial. Today we have an exciting show talking about the good old days, ? And we're going to kind of focus around the 50s and the 60s. And I did a little research of some of the things that happened during the 50s. It was the first modern credit card that was in the 50s, the first organ transplant. Unfortunately, there was an Emmett Till brutal murder. He was allegedly, he whistled at a white woman. Was the first Peanuts cartoon strip in the 50s. The Little Rock Nine, Browns versus the Board of Education. The Korean War began there during that time. Senator Joseph McCarthy began a communist witch hunt, according to the 50s research I did. Also, Jackie Robinson broke the Major League Baseball color barrier. We had the sit-in in Woolworths during that time. And also, U.S. President Truman ordered construction of the hydrogen bomb. And also, he executed he started the order integrating the U.S. Armed Forces. So today, my guest is going to also continue our conversation talking about what happened and how we grew up in the 50s and the 60s in Southampton or the East End. So welcome, John McCain. How are you? McMahon, I'm sorry.
No problem. It's close enough for today.
How are you today, hon?
I'm doing good.
So tell us a little bit about your family. You grew up in Southampton?
I was born in Southampton, and I lived there until I moved to Sag Harbor when I became a police officer there. We lived 2 doors away from my grandmother's house that was built in the 1600s.
Wow. My
mother was a Jessup, and Jessup's Neck was part of the original 1,600 acres deeded by the King of England to the Jessups. My father's family came over from Ireland in the 1860s. My great-great-grandfather was a mason who built the lighthouse in Shinnecock, by the Shinnecock Canal, that was dynamited in 1948. He was killed in the Battle of Honey Hill in South Carolina, fighting for the Union side in 1864, and for whom I am named after. And we lived there until, like I said, I moved to Sag Harbor. I went to Southampton Public Schools and Southampton College at the time. Played basketball with some of the greats and not so greats.
And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about you growing up in that era and how, who did you grow up with some of the people in the schools, some of the African-American gentlemen that you grew up with that you mentioned to me.
Played basketball as a JV in 1963-64.
Mighty Mariners?
Mighty Mariners.
Mighty Mariners.
Played football for 4 years. I got to play football because the report cards did not come out until after football season was over. After my father saw my grades, I wasn't allowed to play sports anymore. So I became the team manager of the basketball team. And everyone talks about Clarence Footsie Walker and Ronnie Baxter and the county championships. The gentleman I saw coming up was Edward Tish Davis and Junie Wingfield, Willie Woodby, and several others who I apologize, along with Jody Fanning, Pete Knight.
Jody Fanning.
These guys worked as a team. And in the 60s, high school basketball teams were not allowed to dunk the basketball.
Really? And
I forgot which game it was, but Coach Joe Romanowski Sr. wanted to send a message. So he called Tish over, and he says, I don't care if you break the backboard, you dunk it. Tish went out, slammed it through. Referee hits him with a technical. Southampton started off the game down 1-0.
Wow.
But they won. The last game I saw Junie play. They did not have the playoff formats that they do now, where the Class B plays Class C, then you play for the Long Island and the States.
Right.
You strictly played against the teams in your conference, which at that time, I believe we were Class C. And Southampton was trailing in the championship game by 1 point. with 5 or 7 seconds left. Coach Romanowski called over the team and set a play up. And it didn't go as it was supposed to. Junie was supposed to get closer to the basket. He was basically, if I remember, at the top of the key. And he held the ball and he looked up, saw it was about 2 seconds to go, and he threw one up. And it hit the rim and circled 3 to 4 times, wobbling. And then it fell through. The time was over. Southampton was the champions.
And the crowd went
All the
wild.
crowd, and we were playing at a neutral school. I forgot where it is. And then, as they got out, Ronnie Baxter started leading the troops. And then Footsie came in. And they had a center by the name of Ton Perazovitz.
Yes.
And they should have won the counties 4 years in a row. The first year they played, both, I believe, Sag Harbor and Southampton got cheated out of the championship games because they brought in the referees from the West End. And they were not used to Romanowski's run and gun.
Right.
And so what happened was they wound up fouling Footsie and Ronnie out of the game, if I'm correct. And the next year they brought in East End referees. And Southampton won. The next year they had East End referees and they won. The third year, I hate to say it, I think Southampton read its own press clippings and thought that they could pull it out of the hat at any time, and that's when they lost in the playoffs. But I believe it's still 60 or 70 games that they won in a row.
I think it was.
And we were talking, before we went on, about your father.
Right. And my dad is Noah Simmons,
Known
a.k.a.
Crook. I played against him when he was in his 40s, as we believe. And I don't think I ever, for the first 2 or 3 years I played against him, I don't think I ever got a hit off him. And they played, I believe the team was the Hotel St. James.
Yes, it was.
Which was an all Afro-American team. And we had some fantastic games with these guys. And of course, at those times you had the Arrow Laundry, Snow White Laundry, the Polish Hall, the Hotel St. James. They had, I think, 10 or 12 teams at those times.
I think so.
And then we went from what is now the town hall, the playing field there, to what is now the middle school playing field.
Right.
And the tradition carried on. And as we were discussing also, there was never any animosity in those days. There was no racial name calling. You went out there, if you got beat, you shook the man's hand. A couple of times we'd bet a case of beer and have to pay up, but you know, there was no problems with
But
these.
it was great games, man.
Yes.
It was like serious. And you kind of mentioned that you think my dad was kind of cheating a little bit.
Well, when we were playing the full windmill pitch, he was legitimate. When we had to go to the modified, is where you can't go above your shoulder, your dad would do one of these.
The fast pitch.
Yes. And so we would all be hopping up and down, and he would just smile at us and walk off the field in the victory again. And he was those guys were in competitive every year for the championship.
If I recall right, too, John, they used to travel. They went, I think, up.
They could have.
Oh, okay. You didn't go that.
No, we did not travel. I did play later on for a team with all Afro-Americans except Smiley here, run by Ron Gilliam.
Oh.
And we would travel. We used to play against Billy DePetris at Bridgehampton High School. And as long as we weren't winning, the rules stayed the same. If we started to win, after halftime, the rules changed as to where the out of bounds and such was. And that's when prejudice first started showing up. I was on the police force, and I actually had people in Sag Harbor mad at me because I was playing on an Afro-American team.
Really?
I love basketball. I said, I don't care what they are, what religion, race, nationality. If they've got that orange ball, I'm going to play. And when I was still in high school, as I said, I couldn't play anymore, but we had open gym in Southampton. One night a week and Saturday afternoons. And I would go up against Footsie and Ronnie, Richie Height, and other Afro-American ball players. And I used to tease Joe Romanowski. I says, you know, you're prejudiced. And, you know, Big Joe.
Yeah.
He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you took a gifted Afro-American athlete that went on to play in the NBA over a slow white boy that couldn't jump. But we'd play and play and play. So when I did play college ball for 2 years, JV, I was going up against kids that had not played against Afro-American athletes. And I could handle myself better against them than I could my own teammates in Southampton.
Wow, wow.
So we had a lot of good times.
But it's curious, I'm getting back to what you said about the race relationships during that time. But you said somehow it started changing because, how did they approach you? How did that, how did they approach you?
Well, basically they told me, what are you doing playing with those?
And they said the word probably.
They said the word. And I said, I don't care. All I see is an orange basketball.
And when was that time, John, about?
That would have been 70, 71, 72.
Really?
Yeah.
And you just to put that in perspective, that's like 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and we still were having issues.
That was after my great-great-grandfather was killed fighting for the North to free the slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am walking into a village where my father was born. And my father and mother always taught me not to be prejudiced. My father told me the story. When he worked for the telephone company, he would hitchhike home from Riverhead to Sag Harbor on the weekends. And one night, he was driving, got picked up, and he said they were coming down past where P.C. Richards is right now. And he said there was an Afro-American hitchhiking. And the guy slammed on the brakes, opened up the glove compartment, and pulled out a revolver. And he said, do you see that SOB trying to hitch a ride from a white man? And Dad said he had to jump out of the car and yell at this guy, get away, he's got a gun, he's going to kill you.
Wow.
So that was earlier.
And what was that, like in the 50s?
That would have, I believe, that would have been before he married my mother, so that would have been back in the 30s.
In the 30s. And when you tell stories about that, that stuff on the East End, the racial kind of conflicts they have, people don't want to believe that, and it's,
it was there.
And this is why I appreciate you coming on and talking about this, because I think it's, not that I want to bring it up, but I think it's one thing to talk about it, to understand that it had happened, to go past it, and to maybe think about that, how far have we come since then, John?
On my softball teams, I had Afro-Americans, I had Hispanics, and some of the guys I played against who I went to high school with were asking me why was I letting them on the field. I said, because they like to play baseball. I don't care. We drank together, we eat pizza together, we'd party together. Wasn't a harsh word spoken.
But something else you said too, though, John, I think is critical, is that you said your parents.
My parents, yes.
And I think maybe might be the foundation of how people are brought up and how their mindset is, how their parents direct them or not direct them, or still into them prejudice or non-prejudice.
Years ago, I had to give a breathalyzer test because a deputy sheriff by the name of Ike Carter had pulled a drunk over in Sag Harbor.
I remember Ike Carter.
And I'd never met the gentleman before. And I'm setting up this breathalyzer. This guy's running his mouth, and I finally said, it's either officer, sir, or deputy. Enough with the racial. And the guy looked at me and he says, McMahon. I said, yes. He says, was your grandmother Miss Katie May? And I said, yes, sir. He said, I worked for that woman. She made us work hard, but she was fair. She never paid us less than what she paid the other men. But you had to give her 8 hours pay a day to get 8 hours pay out of her. If you work 7 hours and 30 minutes, you got 7 hours and 30 minutes worth of pay. And so, again, that was instilled in my father by his father and mother.
Right, right.
So my friends grew up with Afro-American coming over, their friends coming over and spending the night, eating dinner with us. It's...
Wow.
And then you go down and put your uniform on and go down to the deli or the coffee shop, and you got people asking why you're hanging out with your friends.
Wow. And we also talked about the Jute joint down in Southampton called Fives.
Fives, that's, yep.
That's at 245 North Sea Road, which is now, I have to put a plug in, is now going to be the East End African American Museum of the East End, which is coming up soon. So tell us a little bit about Fives.
I know it was a rowdy place in its heyday. And I know they had a riot there one night.
Really?
And a trooper by the name of Rod Davis was supposedly the first officer on the scene. And he just walked in and said, "My name is Davis, D-I-V-I-S, and this has got to stop." And they said they had guys going out the windows, at the back doors. And he just turned around and got back in the state trooper's
No,
car.
who was he?
He was a state trooper.
Oh, okay.
Walked in with his gun in his hand. He said, "This will stop." And from what I understand, he calmed down for the next couple of nights.
But basically, you know, what I recall is it was a place during the time where a lot of African Americans hung out because, you know,
Yes.
it was during the time where it was some, as you have expressed, some racial problems during that time. So what I could recall is that was a place where a lot of the East End people hung out. And it was parties and
yeah, it was it. That was it.
restaurants.
That was their social club.
Exactly.
And in Flanders, where they had the Bluebird,
The Bluebird.
and you had Pinckney's on the Turnpike. Mm-hmm. But Pinckney was more integrated. I mean,
Oh, really?
it was mainly Afro-American, but I've spoken to several old-timers who said they'd get done working with their coworkers, and white and black would sit at the bar and drink together.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Maybe they weren't the most welcome people in the place, but nobody
Nobody kicked him out.
kicked them out.
There was another, we were talking about this, it was another place someone told me about in Bowdoin Square, downstairs, was also where a lot of African Americans were welcome to come. You know, because someone said it was just a juke joint, but then somebody corrected me and said, no, there was another place downstairs at Bowdoin Square in Southampton.
I believe it was called Jumps, but that's before my time, my era. And then, like I said, with the Afro-American community in Southampton, we got along. In fact, John Stewart, who had a car detailing up at Bimbo Williamson's
I remember
auto
that.
body,
I remember that.
paid me to teach his son to drive. So there was really no animosity at all. And when I first went on Southampton Village Police in 1968, I worked alongside Roger Bailey, who became postmaster in Southampton.
And I think that was significant for an African American to be a postmaster.
Well, he was one imposing police officer. He basically, if there was a problem with the Afro-American community, Roger Bailey was the one that went there. And it wasn't until after his passing I found out he was a Tuskegee Airman. He never flaunted that. He was a bomber pilot or a bomber crewman. And then when I went to work with Sag Harbor, I worked alongside Paul Pop Jones.
I remember Pop Jones.
And never had to worry about my backup coming. So, I mean, I never saw, maybe I'm, not seeing the trees for the forest. I never had a problem working with anybody. I don't care if, but I see, now I read about the fights between Southampton and Hampton Bays and the rest of it. That was never there. When you were a cheerleader, they had the bonfires for the football team, the pep rallies for the basketball team.
We had a blast.
Nobody had a problem. And a lot of the problems, I think, when I was working, to change the subject, there was the migrant labor camps.
Okay, I remember those too.
And they were, every year, they'd get repaired, and every year they'd get destroyed, and then you'd have the problems with guys who couldn't get work, panhandling, burglaries.
Okay.
And I think that might have started some of the problems. But
Before I forget, I've been still trying to find this out. I think I mentioned, your sister mentioned to me, Sheila mentioned to me, and I think I mentioned to you again. It's been a mystery to me about the juke joint, about it being burned down or it got burned down. I'm not.
there was a fire. I was out of Southampton by that.
Oh, okay.
I believe what happened is it was closed, condemned basically. I don't think they had a liquor license for most of the time it was in operation near the end. And if I vaguely remember, there was a fire there and they condemned the building.
Well, someone had mentioned to me, and this is what, you know, I don't really almost want to say this on television, but I'm just going to go and just say I was told that it was burned down because it was, you know, it got out of hand, and they said that the community wanted to burn down. And I don't know what the story is, but I think just for the history of us trying to get down to
I
it.
know there were a lot of homeowners up there that were not happy with the shenanigans that would go on there. And I think after the alcohol came into effect, in the 60s is when the marijuana started.
And they said there was drugs, that's what they were mentioning.
Yes, and that's why the village police had it under surveillance, the state police, the county police. And at that time, I was in Sag Harbor, so I was out of the loop.
Okay,
What you
okay.
might want to do is get a hold of retired Chief Lars King.
Ah,
And I'm sure he can fill you in because he has several Afro-American officers under him. And he can get more information on that to you than I can.
okay, we might have to go that route. But you know, John, just to, you know, we have like 6 minutes or so left. I still want to get back to talking about the race relationship even now. Why do you think it's different? Because it seemed like it's a little more intense now than it was even then, and that's been a while ago. What do you think, what's your take on
I
why?
think it has to do with economics. When I was on the police force, I had my own side business. I was an electrician, a master electrician. And when I went to work for a couple of contractors, they had all Afro-American crews.
Mm-hmm.
And over the times, they've been replaced by Hispanics. So now these gentlemen don't have the work. If you look in Bridgehampton, it's becoming gentrified.
Southampton too, actually where I live on Hillcrest, and I'm putting this really out there.
Yeah, it's
Definitely is.
well in Sag Harbor Hills. Sag Harbor off Route 114 is Sag Harbor Hills, Nineveh Beach, and Chatfield Hills.
Mm-hmm.
And that originally was Sag Harbor Hills was being built by three gentlemen in partnership.
Mm-hmm.
They got into a dispute, and the one partner sold out to Afro-Americans. And we wound up with doctors, lawyers, Supreme Court justices, undertakers, the elite.
Mm-hmm.
And now it was all black. They did not want the riffraff coming in there. So when they had Adam Clayton Powell come out for a fish fry, they would hire the police department to keep the turnpike Afro-Americans out of their own development.
Wow.
Now these kids have grown up, gone to college. They're working in Washington. They're working in Chicago. And one by one, every house in there is being bought out by a white or Hispanic family. So you're not seeing the people out here that you used to see. And I've noticed in East Hampton that a lot of where the Afro-American community was is being replaced by the Hispanics because they'll move in multiple people into the same dwelling, and the money is not there for the Afro-Americans to stay there.
Okay, this is a hot topic, and I'm going to go there. Are the Hispanics buying the houses, or are they owned by landlords and some are?
There's a spattering of both. I know I have inspected one house where there's 6 bedrooms and every one of them has a lock on it because I do electrical inspections. I've also gone to homes owned by Hispanics who are renting to Hispanics. And I've gone down in the basement and found people living in the basement with wires run underneath the carpet, and I've had to go to the East Hampton Town Building Department and have the house condemned.
And that happens?
Yes, they're taking advantage of their own nationalities. You'd have
Wow.
three bedrooms. They'd have no refrigeration, no fire exits, no exit windows. And they were being charged some phenomenal amount of money. And then you have other houses, which are owned by the Hispanics, that put my landscaping to shame because they take great pride in what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same thing with Sag Harbor Hills. The community up there and wanted to take pride in itself. And if somebody was letting their house become run down, then the community would go talk to that.
Mm-hmm.
They'd handle it in-house.
Yes, yes.
And now what has happened is it's turned into a little contest, especially in East Hampton where I do inspections. The neighbor sees something they don't like, they anonymously call the building department. And and everybody has to get turned in, and then they find out there's an open permit, and then, so I don't know what's causing it all. Like I said, like I said, I had a good time with your father. I had great times with the guys I played with, and now it seems everybody's mad at everybody else, or they want what somebody else has.
But I think, even you and I sitting here, I think we can still make a difference. And I think that's where we have to continue to do that, because I have felt it too, and I look around, I'm like, what is happening? Why is this happening? But the thing that I also think about, I said, if our skin got stripped off, we would still bleed the same.
That's it. I have sons and daughters who have served in the military, and the way the Marine Corps refers to it, either light green or dark green. And that's the way it is. And it's not based on nationality or anything else. And if you think of the person as a person instead of skin color or religion or nationality, then you shouldn't have any problems with your next door neighbor.
But it just amazes me. We have like a minute left, John. This has been a great interview, but it still amazes me that, a person's color of their skin, can make such a difference. It really...
The gentleman who invented blood plasma transfusions died because he could not get a transfusion because it was a white hospital.
And he invented?
He invented that I forget. I want to call it plasma, but it's not.
I know what you're saying.
He figured that out, and he died because he could not get a transfusion at a white hospital, if my history serves me correct.
Well, John, this has been a great interview, and I really appreciate you. I really do. It was great meeting you, and I appreciate your honesty and your just being who you are.
Well, I'm too old to change.
Oh, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. This has been Val, Voices of Wisdom. You have a wonderful day and a great holiday, and thank you, John.
You're welcome.
You have a wonderful day, hon.
You too.